Hey guys, what's happening? It's Brooks Sports by Brooks. Yada, yada, yada. Here we go. And got a good show. And man, a lot of interesting stuff flying around over the weekend into today. Of course, most of it not on television. So it's a good thing you're here. My name is Brooks Melchior. We're live from Los Angeles. We do this every weekday, Monday through Friday, noon Eastern time. Cam Smith is our producer. And we got a ringer guest coming up for you. Gene Sapakoff. When I say ringer, I'm not talking about like Bill Simmons stuff. Just like, I don't know about you, but if you're a really old guy and you hear GOAT, and Cam, you probably thought this, our producer, Cam Smith, you know, the first 50 times I heard someone refer to GOAT as greatest of all time, I thought they were talking about someone who blew a game because GOAT used to be a bad thing. You know what I'm talking about if you're an old guy. But that doesn't apply anymore. That's fine, whatever. But just an aside, as always, there's a lot of those on this show, in case you don't know. So we've got Gene Sapakoff coming up, a ringer type of guest, because he is someone that is very timely and will be very informative and a good friend of mine for many, many years. But he is the guy in the state of South Carolina who is the oracle for Clemson football. He's the Clemson beat reporter for the Charleston paper. And I actually lived in Charleston for like 2.5 years. Unbelievable. Charleston, South Carolina, one of the most underrated towns. And great place if you're looking for a place for a honeymoon. Charleston, South Carolina. Unbelievable. So Gene will join us and we'll talk about Clemson. Hopefully we'll get to it, because and knowing him too, because we haven't talked in a while, and he's the kind of guy that likes to be really friendly, but also needle a little bit. He's a wonderful guy. I used to do baseball play-by-play in Charleston, and he was, at the time, this is like back in the 1600s, and he was the beat guy for the minor league baseball team in Charleston. So we would sit in the friggin' press box all night, every night for 2 summers. And it wasn't very hot, and there weren't a lot of mosquitoes, and it wasn't annoying. And they didn't build a brand new ballpark in Charleston and move into it the moment I left. None of that happened. Oh, wait, it did. I'm sorry. And then Matt Lombardo, who to me is someone who should be like on NFL Network. Cam, don't you think Matt Lombardo should be the next guy up, as they say, right? Boy, is that phrase getting overused these days. Yeah. Next guy. But if there's a next guy up, like or CBS Sports, like CBS Sports HQ, because he's not the best guy who isn't on television. He's every bit as good as any of those people right now. And for my money, the best beat guy with the Giants. And it's going to be really, I mean, I want to talk to him because I know we've talked to him enough to know, if you haven't noticed on the show, we have had, I mean, well over 100 guests, probably approaching 200 guests. And there's some people we bring back because, you know, you bring him on for a certain reason. Of course, he's a Giants guy and we've had him on several times, but also you come to understand, oh, hell, he knows everything about the NFL. He's following everything. He's on top of it. And so we're going to talk to him about the NFL playoffs and in addition to the Giants, because the New York Giants, that's something I really want to talk about because it's a fascinating story. By the way, we're going to get to the games in a second. Just chill. And we're going to get to Mike Vrabel's penis in a second because that's the big story. That's the lead story that you're going to be hearing. You heard me right. We'll get to it in a second. But I want to get to Joe Judge, Matt Rule, the Giants, and what happened. And if there's a person on earth who would actually know, it would be Matt Lombardo. But I just want to say one thing, and I'm going to bring this up. But you may remember, it's really kind of funny, but you may remember when the Giants hired this Joe Judge guy from the Patriots. And if you're a Pats fan or in New England, you know who he is, and he's this, that, and the other. But it did come out of left field. And so they hired this guy, and the hire of Joe Judge comes, on the heels of Matt Rule being hired by the Carolina Panthers. Well, the Giants reportedly had been, in the running for this hotshot guy, Matt Rule, who would be a great fit theoretically for the Giants. But wait a minute, he took the Panthers job. What's that all about? And he takes the Panthers job before the Giants fill their job. So it looks like he's picked the Panthers over the Giants, Matt Rule, right? But if you're following the media, you're told, it's been reported, oh, no, that's not what happened. Matt Rule didn't turn the Giants down. Matt Rule didn't not return the calls of the New York Giants. Oh, no. The New York, this is according to all the, and there's too many to name, all the reporters out there on all the big networks immediately launched into damage control mode, be it for agents or the Giants, letting us know that Judge was their guy and that they had to hire, this is funny, Joe Judge. And they had to do it when they did it because Mississippi State was putting pressure on him. I'm trying to say that with a straight face, but that's been reported and re-reported over and over again as if the Giants, didn't have any leverage with this anonymous guy, Joe. Oh, but I know he's a Belichick guy, this anonymous Joe Judge guy, special teams guy, wide receivers coach. Think about the Pats wide receivers this year. Right. That guy, because Mississippi State really was putting pressure on him to take that job, the Giants had to move on him, New York Giants. And he was their guy, not Matt Rule. No. Here's what happened. And we're going to talk to Matt Lombardo about it. I just been dying to get this off my chest, dying to get back on the show to talk about this. That's why I just couldn't help it. It's like I'm the guy who has to, I'm the dessert guy before, the entree. I'm the guy that mom yells at. Don't touch that. Leave it alone. Eat your salad, whatever. I have to get to, I have to have an impulse control. That's the problem with me. But so I wanted to talk about this. And we're going to, with the expert, Matt Lombardo, and find out what's really going on. But here's what I believe is happening or happened. If you remember, and we played the clip on this show of, I believe it was Peter King, talking about the reason Matt Rule went to the Carolina Panthers. It was made clear that, of course, you've got this analytics guy, this billionaire Tepper, who now runs the Panthers. But it was made clear that analytics, and it's like, I forgot how they refer to it, but it's like a sports science something that Matt Rule has done. Some really, really vague thing that, okay, sports science, whatever that is. Well, that's what apparently Matt Rule has set up some sort of sports science department system at Baylor to evaluate players. And I guess that's a big secret to their success. And Cam, I think you're thinking the same thing I'm thinking. That's probably how they made those puppets, right? With that sports science setup that they already have in place. So they were able to make those puppets that looked like the Baylor recruits and then put them on Twitter and all that stuff that we played back. No, I'm just kidding on that part. But, and so the idea is that Rule wanted to go to the Panthers because the Panthers came down to Waco, and Tepper has kind of this predisposition to be an analytics guy already. And they were all in on facilitating everything that he wanted, and they gave him as much money as he wanted, which they did, right? And so that's why I went to the Panthers. Okay. Now think about the Giants, New York Giants. Think about, if you're Matt Rule, what seemingly would be the better job. And I know he turned the Jets down, but the Jets aren't the Giants. Okay. So how does he not end up with the Giants? How does he not end up with the Giants? When the Giants general manager, and we played this clip back 45 times, I think it was either last week or the week before, Dave, now remember that sports science stuff and how that's what got Rule to Carolina. Now think back to that Dave Gettleman clip, the general manager of the Giants, talking about their analytics department and the computer folks that he had recently hired, 4 computer folks. Right. And that made the rounds big time. And I said at the time that this is going to cost them dearly. This is going to cost them with coaching prospects. And in my opinion, it did. But then again, Matt Lombardo will probably come on and beat me down in about 3 seconds and we'll move on. I just spent 45 minutes on it and he'll clear it up in about, stop me in like 2 seconds. No, you're wrong. But so I guess we have some breaking news here involving Antonio Brown. And is that TMZ? Yeah, it is. Let me take a look here at, if you would email that to me, Cam, that'd be great. But I guess we have some sort of breaking news involving Antonio Brown. And I'm sure it's all good. And it's all it has to do with is maybe he just announced his tour dates. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe not. Let's, maybe it's something else. Let me look here. Let me get through the Jeffrey Epstein thing. There it is. Okay. All righty. What do we have? Oh, there. This is. All right. All right. Let me read this to you. This came down today, moments ago. Oh, God. Moments ago on TMZ Sports. Of course, Evan Rosenblum, good friend of ours, doing a great job. I mean, here's the thing. We could have him on every day. Could we not, Cam? So let's take a look at this story and see what there is to it. But let me read it to you. This has come out today on TMZ Sports. And the headline is, Antonio Brown throws, quote, bag of dicks, unquote, at baby mama in police showdown. Another bizarre police incident at Antonio Brown's Florida home. This time, cops responded and by the way, if TMZ's calling you bizarre, it's not bizarre. It's a lot more than bizarre. Another bizarre police incident at Antonio Brown's Florida home. This time, cops responded after a dispute with his baby mama. I mean, come on. Can we not just put the woman's name in there or at least kind of identify her? At the very least, a little more specifically. It's disrespectful enough, right? That's not disrespectful anymore. All right. Maybe I'm late to the party on that. After a dispute with his baby mama, and it turned very nasty. Okay. So Antonio Brown having a dispute with his baby mama. Her name is Chelsea Kyrus. All right. He's having a dispute with her, and the cops are called to try to handle this dispute. And let's continue with this story. We've reached out to cops to find out exactly why they were called to the home and who made the call. But here's what we know so far. This is in Florida, several Hollywood Police Department officers arrived at Brown's home around 10 a.m. local time on Monday. And Brown's baby mama, now we get her name. It takes like 5 paragraphs to give the woman her name. Chelsea Kyrus, she was there too. They have 3 children together. Baby's mama, right? Brown repeatedly told the officers he had previously evicted her, how nice, from his home with the 3 children. But, well, and I'm not saying that's what happened, but allowed her on the property so she could pick up her kids and take them to school. So the kids are living there. But Brown claims during the handoff, Chelsea tried to steal one of his cars and he wasn't having it. And when here's the thing, when Brown says the mother of my 3 children who's coming to pick them up is trying to steal my car, right? That's a little drastic, don't you think, in his description? I understand it's a strained relationship, but steal his car. She's going to steal his car. And what is she going to do with it? Well, let's say she had it stripped and she made 10 grand or something, right? How would that work out for her, you think, in the end with him? Would that work out well? Would she want to do something like that? So, not saying that she wasn't trying to steal his car, but characterizing, maybe, jumping in the car and trying to take it. Take is probably the word you're looking for here, right? Take, not steal. But Lord knows, and thank God, we don't have all the details. I don't know exactly what's going on, but it's just ridiculous to hear a description like that under the circumstances. So let's continue. At one point, Antonio Brown screams at Kyrus, quote, "Bitch, you don't drive Bentleys. This is not your life," unquote. Right. So I guess the car was a Bentley and she had gotten into the car, it sounds like, and was going to try to drive it. And that was his response. Quote, "Bitch, you don't drive Bentleys. This is not your life," unquote. All right. Wonderful. What a great guy. What a great guy to hang out with. So continuing, Brown was shouting to the cops that he wanted her off his property as soon as possible and screamed insults at her from across the street in front of her kids. Listen, this guy, this kind of stuff, this is as bad as it, I mean, it's not as bad as it gets. I understand that, but this stuff, all I'm thinking, you know what I'm thinking about right now as I'm reading this, or who I'm thinking about right now? Sean Payton, Bill Belichick, Tom Brady, Julian Edelman, all the people who have supported. Oh, wait a minute, Brooks. They didn't know about this stuff. Well, this just happened. And this isn't it's as typical. I mean, the reason he's doing this stuff, part of it is Tom Brady, Julian Edelman, Bill Belichick. I have no problem saying that. Sean Payton. Right. I mean, I remember thinking about the Raiders situation and how it, we find out that he confronts Mayock and I think called him a cracker. Oh, no, he didn't. Right. And then what does he do? He records John Gruden's phone call with him. But it's one thing after another, and it continues. And it's continuing because he knows, a little bit like NFL owners, a little bit like the owners of the Texans, Cal McNair, it really doesn't matter what you do. You're going to have an opportunity in the NFL, no matter what, because you can play. And if you're an NFL owner, you're always going to get that $300 million television check every year, even if you decide Bill O'Brien is your guy, or you hire Cliff Kingsbury, right? Or Freddie Kitchens, right? Or your franchise, the Detroit Lions, is one of the original NFL franchises and has never been to the Super Bowl. NFL 100 years of the Lions not going to the Super Bowl. Isn't that amazing if you just think about it as an aside? As much as we talk about the NFL and the Lions, and oh God, the statistics are ridiculous now. But think about it. And maybe we could start this, Cam. Let's start like a campaign about the Lions, the 100th anniversary of them not ever making the Super Bowl, bringing that up. That's kind of a significant statistic, isn't it? But I never, ever, ever hear people. And Browns are a little different. They're not one of the original teams, of course. They haven't been in the Super Bowl either. It feels like my Chiefs haven't. They made it when I was 3 years old. So we're going to get back to all of this stuff. And boy, I feel like John Gruden. I feel like Mike Mayock. I feel like Bill Belichick. We had all of this show set up, Cam, right? And then all of a sudden, what happens? Antonio Brown happens. And now we're going to talk more NFL with Matt Lombardo of NJ.com, Newark Star-Ledger, the Oracle, as far as the New York Giants is concerned. And boy, oh boy, do we have some stuff to talk about today. Thanks so much, Matt. I really appreciate it.
Of course, Brooks. Thanks for having me on. It's always a great time.
So have you seen any of the AB stuff?
You know what? Yeah. I just saw some of it when I was setting up here, and I heard you talking about what went on. And it just goes to show you just how out of touch and how troubled Antonio Brown is as a person, and certainly is where his football career stands at this point.
Yeah, and as you may have heard this, you may not have heard this. I agree 100%. But as I'm reading this by no means is a surprise. And this is kind of par for the course.
Oh, no doubt, right? Especially when you look at the offseason and everything that he did to talk himself out of Pittsburgh, to wind up in Oakland, and everything that went on with him and John Gruden, and that bizarre video of him celebrating getting released and losing out on that guaranteed money. And then, of course, everything we read in the fantastic Robert Klemko story on Sports Illustrated, which really detailed the issues in his personal life. To here we are now. It's not a surprise, and I think that the NFL is kind of doing the right thing here by making sure that he doesn't wind up back in the league.
Well, what's really fascinating, though, is as I'm reading this, I'm thinking of Sean Payton. I'm thinking of Bill Belichick. These mythic, glorious figures, these great coaches. And I don't think anybody's saying that Bill Belichick is a wonderful person, but and I'm not saying that he's not a nice guy and a cool dude. But Sean Payton, and I know Sean's a good guy, but he's kind of a good. It's funny when you think about kind of the environment that we are currently in present day America, that Sean Payton can kind of tiptoe over to Antonio Brown and bring him in.
Yeah.
And then we really don't know what happened. And then Brown's gone, and nobody says a thing or makes a big deal. Doesn't treat it like it's differently. Let me ask you a question. If you were covering the Saints, I don't want to put you on the spot,
sure,
but if you were covering the Saints in that situation, I mean, doesn't that feel like is it fair to take the Me Too stuff, right, that's going on and not apply it if you're interviewing Peyton in the context of Brown coming down, but kind of give it more gravity in the way that you're approaching. Maybe you're calling your editors, in the non-sports department and trying to give them a little perspective on the story. I mean, what are your thoughts?
I think that definitely plays into it, but I think that it becomes a much bigger issue because this isn't a case in point of Sean Payton and the Saints being blindsided here. There's a track record of issues and concerns with Antonio Brown, and certainly it would be kind of lack of the institutional control that we've seen in the NFL in recent years to even entertain the idea, at least in my opinion, to bring someone with as toxic a personality as Antonio Brown into that situation. But I think it provides the larger issue league-wide in that these teams, these owners, and these coaches will sacrifice so much when it comes to the character of these guys and their football team for someone that can help them win one or two more games or get them closer to a championship.
Why? I mean, this is a really weird situation. And And believe me, I recognize the situation the NFLPA is in. I mean, there's so many, we could talk about this for an hour because it would be interesting because there's so many angles to this because AB does so many things, right? But if I'm the NFLPA, how could, I mean, they're just holding AB out and they're holding him in limbo, and he goes down to New Orleans and we hear he had a good workout, but he's not signed. And well, we're going to put him on the exempt list, but he's not on it. I mean, if you're the NFLPA, are you screaming right now?
Yeah, I think that I'd be screaming in this case. I'd also be screaming in the case of Colin Kaepernick, because I think there's a lot of parallels here. Because if you look at all of the issues with Antonio Brown off the field, all of the concerns, all of the Me Too accusations that we've read about from Antonio Brown, compared with the political ideology and the beliefs of Colin Kaepernick, that Kaepernick is sidelined and Brown is sidelined. I think that if you're the NFLPA, you have to handle those two things very similarly. And I think that there's more of a basis for the league to keep Antonio Brown out than there would be for this continued absence of Colin Kaepernick from the league at this point.
You know, and we're visiting with Matt Lombardo, NJ.com, New York Star Ledger, New York Giants, and Penn State guy as well, but New York Giants beat reporter. And we're going to talk some NFL. We're going to talk about the games here shortly. But, I mean, I've got so many thoughts about Antonio Brown as to why maybe the Saints would go in on him and take a look at him.
I think it's so simple as they wanted another weapon to try and win. I think that they saw what their offense was doing down the stretch. They looked at the rest of the NFC. They saw an opportunity and an opening there to add another weapon for Drew Brees. And I think, Brooks, it probably just comes down to, okay, this guy had a great workout. We know what he's capable of doing. Probably one of the best 5 or so wide receivers of the past decade during his time with the Steelers, maybe better than that. And it probably just comes down to something as simple as Sean Payton and the owners saying, we're not comfortable with this.
But then this is my speculation, right? Could there not be a little bit of F you to the league, F you to, oh, you Goodell, you've done this to us, right? And you want to have your cake and eat it too. So we're going to bring him in. What are you going to do now? I'm not saying that's the only reason they brought him in,
right?
To kind of, with the red cape thing with the bull, you know, kind of test Goodell's medal here. I mean, do you think that there's anything to that?
Yeah, that almost possible? Like a game of chicken. Okay, if we sign this guy, are you going to screw us, for lack of a better term, again, and put this guy on the exempt list and not have him be allowed to play for the rest of the season and into the playoffs? Or are we going to be able to sign him, put him out there, and get him on the field right away? You're right. This is like an onion.
We're putting you on the spot.
The more layers that you peel off, the more fascinating the story becomes.
And so now, and I just went crazy. I opened the show and talked for like 10 minutes. I was going to do other things, but I couldn't help myself. I had to talk about the Joe Judge, Matt Rule situation and how it played out the day that Joe Judge was hired. That was one of the more, I got to admit, I've been covering it. You've been covering it. You're way closer than I am in this particular case. That is one of the more weird situations, Judge getting hired. But then, and I know you're paying attention to this, the way things are kind of being spun with the timing of Rule, who was someone that was portrayed as someone that the Giants had a congruency with, and it could happen, right? And that why wouldn't Rule want to go to the Giants? All of a sudden, boom, he's with the Panthers. And so here's a quick thought on that, and I wanted to run this by you. But all of the things that we heard and we know went on between Tepper, and he has the analytics bent, and they went down to Waco, and they really bought in with Rule on all of his sports science program at Baylor.
Right.
And that was a big part of it, right? And so that's what helps to get him to the Panthers. And I'm thinking about the video we ran on this show 47,000 times of Dave Gettleman a couple of weeks ago talking about the computer folks.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So in that context, you know, you would think that might make sense. And then on top of that, we're to believe that Mississippi State pushing Joe Judge this is Joe Judge. This isn't Bob Stoops or Urban Meyer. Or this is Joe who, right? It was Mississippi State pushing him to potentially take the job that caused the Giant. To me, that right there sounds like an agent spinning or a team spinning that we kind of blew it, but maybe we didn't blow it. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack here. And I think that what's most fascinating is what happened between the Giants and Matt Rule, the Panthers and Matt Rule, all as Joe Judge was going through his interview. First and foremost, I'm fairly close to many people around Matt Rule. This was a job that he coveted. The Giants had him at the top of their list at the time.
The Giants job.
Search. Correct, the Giants job.
Wow.
So the fact that he was born in New York City, went to high school and state college, played at Penn State, coached at Temple. This was an opportunity for a Northeastern boy to come home. And what happened was he interviewed at his home in Waco with David Tepper and the Carolina Panthers. And obviously when Tepper sneezes and $72 million falls out of his nose, that changes the conversation.
Right.
So obviously when the Panthers went 7 years and $72 million, to me, what happened in East Rutherford was they've already witnessed Ron Rivera go to Washington without even contacting the Giants for an interview, someone who worked with Dave Gettleman. They've already seen Mike McCarthy run from their situation in their interview to the volatile arms of Jerry Jones. They're watching their top target wind up at Baylor. They're about to lose Joe Judge to his alma mater at Mississippi State. Now, honestly, Brooks, I think that they liked and, of course, like Joe Judge enough for him to be the head coach. But I think that this is a marriage of convenience and a marriage out of necessity more so than him being at the top of their list. Because from a PR standpoint, it would have been an absolute nightmare, given the reporting that's been out there from myself and others, that there were candidates reluctant to work with Dave Gettleman because of his lack of a belief and commitment to analytics, losing out on their top two, and if they lost Judge, their top three candidates. So they pulled the trigger on a guy who blew them away in their interview without even mentioning Daniel Jones's name. So there's just so many layers to this story, similar to the Antonio Brown one, where it's going to be very interesting to watch how this era of Giants football unfolds.
Firstly, Joe Judge, we've seen Joe Judge now enough to, I think, tell, a little bit of how his interview may have gone. He blew them away. Joe Judge blew somebody away in an interview. I'm not saying that he wouldn't be impressive, but maybe I am saying he wouldn't be impressive.
Yeah, sitting in the front row of his press conference, Brooks, I got the sense that I was sitting in the living room as a high school junior, and I have a top flight college football coach in my living room trying to sell me on his program. We're talking about, everything, the blue collar mentality of a football team. And we're going to play physical football in a way that embodies the North Jersey, New York region. We're going to tackle to the ground in practice. And I just felt like I was getting the sales pitch for a major Division I program. It was, full of bluster. And I think it really was a message that gives ownership hope. The fans certainly bought into it. There were people tweeting from work that they wanted to run through their computer monitors to play for this guy. And I understand that based on what he was saying, but there wasn't a lot of specifics. He didn't mention one player's name, didn't mention Daniel Jones. And you look at the coaching staff he's beginning to assemble, it's short on experience so far. And it's a rookie head coach who's never called plays on either side of the football. And there's been some success with special teams coaches. I wrote about this today, from Mike Ditka and Dick Vermeil and Belichick to a far lesser degree, and Marv Levy, who have had successful head coaching careers and been to and won Super Bowls. But this is a complete leap of faith on the Maras and the Giants' part. When you had a program builder in Matt Rule on the hook, you had an established Mike McCarthy on the hook, and you didn't even take the time to talk to Josh McDaniels while letting the other two off the hook to other jobs. So they're all in on Judge. He better deliver.
Yeah. We're visiting with Matt Lombardo, great analysis, NJ.com, a New York Star Ledger beat reporter for the New York Giants. And if I'm on in New York City right now, I am screaming at the Maras, reminding them, guys, you're all in on Dave Gettleman. Okay. You lost Matt Rule, and you've got this guy, Joe Judge, expressly because Dave Gettleman's going to get to do whatever he wants with him, including perhaps staffing his staff, which may explain why Joe Judge wasn't talking in specifics. Is that a possibility that Gettleman may be filling out his staff?
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me, but then the hire that they just made at defensive coordinator, I don't know that it would make a lot of sense, because I tweeted about this and I wrote about it when he was hired, that they would have been wise to photocopy the Eagles' plan when they hired Doug Peterson and bring in an established coordinator in Frank Reich, a former head coach in Jim Schwartz, and build a staff of former head coaches and long-term coordinators around a rookie head coach. Now, Joe Judge has far less experience than Peterson did coming into this job than Peterson did with the Eagles, because he called plays with Andy Reid and he was a member of that staff, and they had known him in Philadelphia for a while. Joe Judge, and I wrote about this afternoon, kind of genius by proxy, working for Bill Belichick, not really hands-on other than coaching.
I'm going to get to him.
And now, exactly. And now wide receivers. It just screams to me that you need an experienced staff, and I don't get the sense that that's what they're building at this point.
I want to ask you, you read my mind. I'm going to ask you about Belichick in a second, but let's just think about how it's just one more example as someone like Bieniemy sitting there with what's going on. I mean, it's just this guy, Joe Judge. I recognize the special teams were integral to the six and are to the Patriots, and that kind of is what they sets them apart. And being a special teams coach, you're kind of a mini-me coach to a certain extent, but you're talking about a guy who was a special teams coach and a guy who was a fake wide receivers coach, and wide receivers they didn't have a lot of talent there this year, but nothing to write home about. In fact, you saw Brady after the Eagles game for the first time really lose his mind and throw a tantrum ever. And that's on Joe Judge. So we've got this guy. And okay, so what's the payoff? All right, well, he must be really articulate. He must have some sort of savant, and he may have that, I guess. And then I watched that interview, and it was like it's like 2001 called or 1992 called, and says hello with the cliches and the saying nothing, right? And I'm thinking about Gettleman, and I'm thinking about Gettleman too, because Gettleman's the puppet master. And the hiring practices of NFL teams is a disgrace when you think about the people who really are qualified and who aren't getting, not just black guys, but my God, I mean, am I overreacting?
No, I don't think you are, Brooks. And here's something that I found very interesting. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, that we'll take the Giants at their word, and Joe Judge was the most impressive candidate that they interviewed. Fine, you hire him, whatever. So they've now become a symptom rather than a bug of how the NFL does business in terms of hiring head coaches. But this might wind up being the straw that breaks the camel's back. We've seen multiple reports of African-American coaches now plotting returns to Power 5 college football because they see more of a path to head coaching jobs and promotion in the college ranks than they do in the NFL. Now, the Giants certainly play a role in that when they interview someone like Eric Bieniemy, someone like Chris Richard, who was one of the architects of the Legion of Boom and had the Cowboys passing defense ranked in the top 10 as their secondary coach this year, interview with the Giants and then not get that job. I just look at what's happening right now with the Joe Judge hire. It's symptomatic of a bigger issue, and the Giants might not be the end game, but I think that they're going to wind up being the reason why we're going to see a mass exodus of African-American coaches.
I mean, it is. And you know what? As much as it is, and it really is, black coaches, no doubt about it. It's 2020, right? And you talk about defining old boy network. And Stefanski is another great example,
for sure,
that the Browns would hire that guy presiding over the part of the offense for the Vikings that was the problem, right? Gary Kubiak's the answer, not Stefanski, and Stefanski's been there forever. It's when I saw they hired him, I literally couldn't believe it.
It's just another job that goes by the wayside, where you look at Eric Bieniemy, who's now calling some of the plays for the Kansas City Chiefs, who you talk to people around the league, bright offensive mind, people who have played for him or with him, say great leader of men, program builder. Everything you heard them say about Matt Rule and the Giants spin about Joe Judge is being said about Eric Bieniemy, and it's just disappointing to see.
But look at their bona fides. I mean, Eric Bieniemy, just in terms of bona fides, I mean, and the other part of this whole equation is who wants necessarily their head coach completely consumed with playing, with calling plays the whole time. But that aside, You think about the bona fides of this guy. There's no person out there that has better bona fides and a better resume and has paid his dues and has played all of these different positions as a player, was a badass. I remember him well.
Yeah.
But has really paid his dues. And the guy is around an offensive oracle who, when Mahomes goes down, you know what's funny about the Chiefs is Matt Moore's going to come in, and because Reed's there, we're all kind of like, you know, he probably won't sign anybody because they'll be all right. Take a look at what happens to other teams when that happens. It's a total disaster. And Bieniemy is right there. So that guy has the ultimate bona fides. He has that kind of experience. And so here's one thing I really want to talk about. We haven't mentioned this yet, is Bill Belichick's influence on this, because it's like I hear about Belichick's influence on this hire. That's the good news, or could it be the bad news? So what do you think Belichick's influence was on this? And does this make you, if you're a Giants fan, aren't you a little bit, I don't know about this?
Yeah, I think it's almost paramount to the hire, right? Because you heard John Mara and Steve Tisch talk last Thursday about the phone call and the glowing recommendation that Belichick gave Joe Judge. And I think that a lot of Giants fans are latching onto this hope, as misguided as it might be, that because Joe Judge worked for a long time with Bill Belichick and because he worked for Nick Saban, by the way, he was just a special teams assistant with the Alabama Crimson Tide, not the special teams coordinator. So a couple of layers removed from dealing directly with Nick Saban. But because he's worked with these two geniuses, that he has to be the next great genius. And you and I, neither of us know, right? Judge could go out and he could be the next Bill Parcells for all we know. But if you look at the history, Dabo Sweeney, any of these big names, but you look at the trajectory and the history of the Bill Belichick coaching tree, they've only made, I believe, 7 trips to the postseason. They haven't won a Super Bowl. But then you get back to Bieniemy for an instant here, and you look at the Andy Reid coaching tree, 19 playoff appearances, 2 Super Bowl wins, and it's almost like if you're running to the Nick Saban, Bill Belichick coaching tree, are you really running to the right forest to get your next head coach based on the track record there? Now, obviously, as again, we don't know what Judge is going to develop into, and everybody should be judged on their own merit. But I just look at the Belichick endorsement, I think carried maybe perhaps too much weight in this process.
Interesting. Matt Lombardo, NJ.com, Newark Star Ledger, New York Giants beat reporter. And the reports, and we talked to some guys, you know, cover the Patriots beat after the Joe Judge news came down, and we were told that Belichick had moved him into this position coach status in order to make him more marketable as a head coach. In other words, he's not really the wide receivers coach, or he's kind of just cutting his teeth, I guess, on it for the Patriots.
Yeah, and then Andy Reid did the same thing in 2006 with John Harbaugh. He was the special teams coordinator for years, one of the best in the league, but nobody was interviewing Harbaugh for head coaching jobs. He went to Andy Reid, asked Reid if he could become the defensive backs coach and coach special teams. It worked out. The Ravens hire Harbaugh, and they're probably pretty happy they did it. Belichick did the same thing here with Judge.
Now, the one thing, though, that really stuck out during our interviews with some of the Patriots reporters was the people that we talked to, pretty measured people, especially knowing they're covering the Patriots, and you got to kind of be measured. But I heard some really negative comments about Joe Judge and how he is with the players in public. And I cannot remember, in covering the NFL, you know, and covering major sports in 30 years, I cannot remember a situation where I had multiple reporters mentioning a guy's expletives directed at players during practice, you know, and not saying it was harassment, but bringing it up. That's pretty extraordinary. So when I hear that, and then I start to think, if you're Belichick, are you, and I don't know, but maybe, just maybe, that's an issue and you aren't really all that upset about having him leave the team. I don't know, but that's what I heard.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out. Again, I've been around coaches covering the Eagles and covering the Giants who swear up and down at their players.
And fans.
Players love them for it. And fans, of course. But you know, some of the players love them for it. Some of the players are resentful of it. And I haven't seen Joe Judge run a practice. I haven't seen him interact with players. He hasn't even mentioned Daniel Jones or Saquon Barkley by name in any of the interviews that he's done. And there are reports out, Peter King in his Football Morning in America column today pointed out that in the interview with the Giants, Joe Judge didn't even mention Daniel Jones. So, and he got the job. So to me, how he carries and handles himself with the players remains to be seen. I'm just really fascinated by the fact that you draft a quarterback number 6 overall, and who you hire as his second head coach going into his second year, that he isn't the priority, and how that coach views him isn't the priority in your decision whether to hire a guy or let him go to his next interview.
So I want to ask you about the games right now here in a second. But my final thought on this, I want to hear your final thought, is that you talk about someone who is a pragmatist. Bill Belichick is basically hanging Tom Brady out to dry the last 18 months to 2 years. I know this is, well, and the NFL to a certain extent is a goal watch league for legacy players, right? And I mean, he's not budging. And all, in my opinion, Brady is looking for is a gesture. That's it. Maybe another year or representative money. And look at what he's done. I mean, it's so unbelievable what's taking place with Tom Brady with the Patriots right now. And I don't think people really recognize it, because I think we've been trained, maybe like the Maras, to believe that, well, you know, Belichick, that's the way things should be. And this is normal. It's not normal the way they're treating Brady. Brady played really well in the playoff game. Belichick wants him gone. But my whole point is, here's the whole point, that Bill Belichick is cold-blooded. That's one of his strengths. And so if he thinks that Joe Judge is going to help them get to a Super Bowl, that Joe Judge is a guy he's got to have to win, there's no way in hell. I don't think so. And to think how he's rigging up Joe Judge getting this, and because he's anticipating Joe Judge leaving, to me, that's, knowing his particular personality profile, Belichick, that is a red flag.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you there. And I also think that what's happening in New England, it's really unbelievable given the success that you've seen Belichick and Brady have, and how far out of their way the Patriots have gone to placate Brady, trading Jimmy Garoppolo a couple of years ago when he was
that's the problem the Bill has, I think.
Yeah, they've gone out of their way to placate Brady. Now all of a sudden the pendulum is swinging the other way. And if Brady goes, and I'm not saying that he will, but if he winds up in Los Angeles or Chicago or any of these teams needing a veteran quarterback to put them over the top, there could be an exodus from New England, or at least certainly a fall from grace. Let
me just tell you, I mean, it was very telling to me, and I'm not saying Mike Vrabel's the greatest guy in the world, but it's not like everybody hates Mike Vrabel either. And I know Mike Vrabel when I was at Ohio State, and he was a good guy when I was around him, and he was with the Steelers at the time and all that. But I remember when Belichick was asked after the Titans game, very specifically, hey, is there a little point of pride when you have one of your former players, you know, coach it up and you know, get a chance to win over your team, even though it's a horrible loss? You know, do you take that solace? And Belichick literally did not answer the question, moved to the next question. Now, if Brady, who was not as bad as people I don't think he was, I mean, that in Belichick's defense, they did try on offense to bring people in. They had a lot of bad breaks. So I don't think they were throwing Brady under the bus. But Brady, to me, proved in the last game he can play. If they let him go, right, and they have Stidham or whatever they're going to figure out, you know, I think that this could be a disaster for Bill Belichick. And we may find out a lot about him. But my point about the Vrabel anecdote is there's a lot of people in the league who don't like Bill Belichick. You know, a lot. I think more than like him. And so when bad things start to happen for the Patriots, like you said, an exodus, whether it's inside the organization or outside, even as former players, he has really set himself up for a fall if they've got a big hole at quarterback because they got nothing else on offense.
Yeah, they really don't. And you look at the quarterback situation, they're picking too far back in the draft to target one of these big quarterbacks coming out, barring a titanic move up the board to get a Justin Herbert or a Joe Burrow all the way up at number 1. We know that's not happening. He's a Bengal in waiting after he wins the national championship tonight, of course. But you look at, these other quarterbacks that are available. The Patriots are kind of in no man's land, and they're going to be looking at an Eli Manning as a free agent, a Phillip Rivers as a free agent. You're just kicking the can down the road. Joe Flacco, you're kicking the can down the road another year, and if you're kicking that can down the road, you have to ask yourself, if you're Robert Kraft, if you're letting Tom Brady walk, why are you bringing back the architect in Bill Belichick for another year with a disaster quarterback and a depleting roster? Why not make it a clean break, a clean slate, and promote Josh McDaniels and start the next era right then and there?
So one of my favorite people in the world is Tom Curran, NBC Sports Boston, covers the Patriots. They have him on all the time, and very well measured guy. And so I asked him, and of course, you're a Giants beat reporter. I asked him about the random reports that we hear once in a while that Belichick might be amenable to leaving. If he leaves the Giants, that's his job. So, how do you assess that? What's your read on Belichick? What's
Total pipe dream.
Okay, that's what he said. That's what he said.
Yeah, because
go ahead.
Listen, I think that Bill Belichick writes his own tenure as long as he wants it to last in New England. I think that he gets to pick his exit point. I don't think he's picking it anytime soon. And if he does, I think he's far more likely to retire than he is to go and coach the New York Giants. There was a lot of chatter among fans that John Mara should pick up the phone and call Belichick or try to trade for Bill Belichick
he did.
with Robert Kraft.
Joe Judge. And the Giants got Joe Judge.
Yeah, exactly. You wind up with Joe Judge, but I don't think that there's a lot of smoke, but I think it's coming from some guy lighting up a cigar and not from an actual fire that there could be any chance of Bill Belichick winding up as the Giants head coach, at least anytime soon.
We're visiting with Matt Lombardo with the New York Star Ledger, NJ.com. I want to rush over the games real quick. And man, you're giving us a lot of time. This is so freaking great.
It's always a good time.
But I've been so excited to talk to you about what's going on with the Giants because of what we've talked about. There's so many little things bouncing around. And you know what? You want to believe the Maras are classy people, and it's a classy franchise. And this is not the Haslams, but it is. It is. It just looks a lot nicer, and it's, unfortunately, and there's a lot of NFL teams and I don't want to go back down that rabbit hole. I want to get your opinion about the NFC title game and the 49ers and the Packers. To me, that is a really interesting game. And I'm trying to figure out the Packers because, I can go through the whole thing, what kind of season they've had, the whole situation. But, I think the better question is, are the 49ers as a complete team, not the front seven, as a complete team, a Super Bowl team and a Super Bowl winning team to you?
I think if they played anybody other than the Packers in this game, they could wind up in the Super Bowl. And I look at this NFC championship game right now, Brooks, and I think it's a competition of two mindsets. It's the 80s, 90s, maybe early 2000s mentality of establish the run, build with great defense, keep your opponent under 17 points, and you're going to win the game. That's San Francisco, and I think they have the defense to do that against most teams. Then you have the Packers with Aaron Rodgers, high-flying offense, can throw the ball all over the yard. You have Aaron Jones in the backfield who can run the ball, and I love what they've done with their pass rush this offseason, bringing in Zadarius Smith and Preston Smith. I thought the Giants should have been all in on both of those guys. They whiffed. They couldn't afford them, whatever the reasoning may be. The Packers got them. I just look at the Packers right now, and I think that if you're trying to build a team that can win a Super Bowl, you're emulating what the Packers are doing and what the Kansas City Chiefs are doing. And I think we're on a collision course to see those two teams meet because that's the future of the NFL.
Wow. Because I've been on the Packers, and to a certain extent, how can you not sleep on them the way they play? They've just been putrid at times, but then they haven't been. But everybody was sleeping on them going into that game. And they're probably still sleeping on them because it's a one-man team in Seattle. But I don't know. You're the first guy who's really said to me, I've heard anybody say that the Packers can win this game. It's almost like the 49ers they're this juggernaut now. But I'm with you. I think
love
the
the physical brand of football. I think that George Kittle
they are physical.
Is certainly the future of the tight end position and probably the best or second best tight end in the league right now. Garoppolo's great. That front seven's probably one of the 2 best front sevens in football. But I just look at the pass rush for the Packers, and I look at what they're able to do from a multifaceted offense perspective through the air, in the ground game, what they did to Seattle last night. I know that it was in Lambeau and they had the home field advantage and all that. And I just think the Packers have the personnel to take care of business in this game, and that we're going to see a Super Bowl in 2 weeks where it's going to be like 58-51 in a total shootout that reminds me a lot of that Rams and Chiefs game on Monday night a few years ago.
So before we get to the AFC, and we're talking about the Packers, first of all, I love Jerry Jones and Stephen Jones. I love them. I hope they never leave. I hope they're here forever. Did you see the press conference that they had with Mike McCarthy where maybe they've done this before, maybe other teams do it, but usually when you introduce a new coach, an NFL coach, they get a one shot where it's just them on camera. But the entire press conference was all 3 guys. And, I don't know. To me, I would imagine, and I haven't talked to a lot of Cowboys, I haven't talked to any Cowboys reporters, we need to, since that press conference. But watching Jerry Jones ascribe Marvel superhero characteristics to Mike McCarthy, literally, and he's just sitting there like a bump on a log after Mike McCarthy said, well, I kind of lied and really didn't do my homework.
Yeah, didn't study all the film, but he probably studied more film of the Cowboys than Joe Judge did of the Giants in his interview. So let's be fair.
Right. It's similar. But at least Joe Judge can say, well, and here's just a quick thought that I didn't mention, but I truly believe when you're talking about not bringing up Daniel Jones, he is trading on Belichick. He's trading on the Patriots, and that's like a silver bullet to the Maras. Why, I don't know. You would think they would figure it out and they would be paying attention, but then again, maybe the Maras would say to me, Brooks, we have a general manager. His name is Dave Gettleman. That's it. Well, that's the problem, right? But what are your thoughts on McCarthy? Because he just looks like another Garrett, if not worse. It just means that the Cowboys, the owners, they're going to be meddling that much more.
Brooks, we talked about Joe Judge being a salesman in his press conference, right? And how I felt like I was a recruit in a living room trying to decide where I was going to go to school, and this guy shows up. Mike McCarthy came off like a snake oil salesman because, and I admit I bought into it maybe a little bit too much, this whole offseason hype train of him going to analytics school and committing to analytics and technology.
A couple of media members out there doing it for him.
Yeah, right, exactly. And then he shows up at the press conference and basically alludes to the fact that he didn't do his homework, that some of the claims that were made by people around him and that he himself made might not have been as accurate as we were led to believe. That, to me, I think that I lost a little bit more respect in the Cowboys coaching hire of Mike McCarthy was knocked down a couple pegs based on what I saw from McCarthy in that press conference. Because, look, I thought that the Giants would have been wise to hire either Matt Rule or Mike McCarthy. Rule because he's a program builder and you saw his commitment to analytics and sports science at Baylor and at Temple before that. McCarthy because he came across like he was reformed, he was a forward thinker, he was going to address some of the predictability of his offensive schemes, and then you get a glimpse of McCarthy in Dallas, and it's the same old predictable, tired, old school mentality that lost his way in Green Bay, coaching the best quarterback to walk the planet.
So as far as the Cowboys go, I mean, I'm thinking that it's Kellen Moore's offense now. There's not going to be any more Jason Garrett, and Mike McCarthy, I don't think is going to do anything, no matter what, as bad as it gets. To me, it's clearly Jerry Jones looked at the candidates who were out there and who would submit to him. And McCarthy was the one with the Super Bowl ring. And Jerry Jones is using that Super Bowl ring as a shield against people to criticize McCarthy because that was a bizarre press conference. And the way Jerry Jones was describing it, of course, the sleepover. And we're led to believe that Mike McCarthy suddenly is Pete Carroll. There's this transformation, and clearly there isn't. So as far as the Cowboys go, you've got the DC in place. Mike McCarthy's an offensive guy, right? And he's changed everything and he's updated. But Kellen Moore's going to take over, and you've got Jason Witten lurking. And this looks a little bit like Mike McCarthy's very much a placeholder, but this looks to me like a situation that's worse than Jason Garrett, because at least Garrett had the authority to grab, the play sheet from Kellen Moore and foul everything up, right?
Yeah.
But whereas now this is all Jerry and Steven.
Yeah, I think you can draw a lot of parallels between the Giants hiring Joe Judge and the Joneses hiring Mike McCarthy. They're almost acts of self-preservation, because if you look in New York, Joe Judge isn't wrestling any personnel control away from Dave Gettleman. Meanwhile, in Dallas, they bring in Mike McCarthy, who sold himself as this new age innovator, and it turns out that's not who he is. So Jerry Jones and Stephen Jones retain personnel control, retain the power, and it's almost as if neither one of these ownership groups or general managers wanted to take a step forward with a head coach who would rock the apple cart, like a Bieniemy, like a Rule, certainly like a McDaniels, who wound up going unhired during this cycle and went with what felt safe and what they could control. And who knows how it's going to work out for them. But they both might find themselves in the same situation 2 or 3 years down the road all over again.
They will. They absolutely will. And the Cowboys will indefinitely. I think it's been 25 years, and why would it change with the situation?
All you have to know is Jimmy Johnson is in the Pro Football Hall of Fame before he's in the Dallas Cowboys Ring of Honor. That's all you need to know about Jerry Jones.
Oh my God. Yeah. That's all you need to know when you're to understand where he's coming from. And I want to ask you about McDaniels here in 1 second, but I was sitting there and I'm watching him at the end of that press conference. He went on for like 6 minutes, again, acting like Mike McCarthy has turned into Pete Carroll. And I'm thinking to myself, man, what must the people sitting there be thinking? They must be thinking it's Thursday, because this happens every day. Because part of me is like, wow, Jerry's kind of losing it. And I kind of feel sorry. But then I catch myself and I say, no, you shouldn't feel sorry for him, because this is the way he always is. He is the snake oil salesman. What about Josh McDaniels? I mean, is this a situation where he went in, you think, to Cleveland and was trying to name his terms and DePodesta? I mean, this is so absurd. This makes the Giants look like, the Packers and Lombardi.
The Steelers.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Or the Steelers. That's a better example. But what's your read on McDaniels, the Browns, and his prospects?
Yeah, I think that McDaniels is the heir apparent to Bill Belichick in waiting in New England. And I think that any other job would have to blow him away, so to speak. But I also believe he probably went into that interview and probably said, I'm not working with Dave Podesta. Get this baseball guy out of my organization. Right. I'm going to run the show. I'm going to call the shots. And whether it was Jimmy Haslam not being comfortable with that, whether it was a bridge too far to take full personnel control for after what happened when he left the Colts in the lurch the last time around, or his failures with the Denver Broncos, the Browns seemed like they just went with what was safe and what felt comfortable with Stefanski, rather than turn the keys over to McDaniels. And maybe there might have been, Brooks, some trepidation about dipping into the Bill Belichick coaching pool with McDaniels as well, because of how little success those assistants have had elsewhere.
I mean, we're going to have Ken Carman on, great guy in Cleveland, big time guy tomorrow to talk about the Browns. But it's just like the Giants and the Cowboys. Nothing has changed. You could argue it's worse. And you're looking at the Browns. We've got this bizarre DePodesta arrangement, right? And we don't have a general manager. And we're telling everybody that, right? And we bring in this guy who I'm sure everybody around the league was laughing about, them bringing Stefanski in and hiring him. And another example of the BS that's gone on with hiring coaches. To me, this all has a whiff of Haslam being a Jerry Jones, but unlike Jerry Jones, he just doesn't want everybody to know about it. Haslam is the guy who's running this team.
And he also doesn't have the cachet of 5 Super Bowl rings, sitting in the display case in the front of the facility. And he's not Bill Belichick. He doesn't have the production to match what he wants. I think a more apt comparison here, Brooks, is Daniel Snyder. And it's almost as if there's an equal amount of dysfunction in Washington as there is in Cleveland.
How many guys in the league are like this? It's amazing.
No doubt about it. But I'd argue that Washington finally got it right by going in and hiring Ron Rivera, who also brought in his head analytics guy from Carolina and hired Jack Del Rio as his defensive coordinator. I'd make the case that when you look top to bottom in the NFC East right now, that Washington has the best coaching staff, and it's going to come down to what Rivera can do with Dwayne Haskins this year in terms of an immediate turnaround. But I think that Washington, if Daniel Snyder can, stay at arm's length, if Ron Rivera can win his share of power struggles over ownership, I wouldn't bet against Washington making some noise here in the next couple of years.
Yeah, totally agree with you. Very interested to find out what happens with Haskins. What's the story on him? And Snyder needs to stay away from Haskins.
No doubt.
I mean, I understand, but I think you could make the argument. I don't think it's as important, but it's pretty close that Allen getting blown out is just as important as bringing in Rivera. And of course, Rivera wouldn't have brought in other people, and had free reign had Allen still been there. So I think that's really the pivotal moment here for the Redskins. If they're going to have success, because you can have one or two guys, coaches or staff, but you've got to have someone who's a cancer like Allen cut out, and Snyder doing that was critical. So I want to ask you about the last thing, the AFC game. Now I'm a Chiefs fan.
Oh man, what a roller coaster ride that was! Oh my goodness!
Oh my God, yeah. Tell me about it. Well, actually, having grown up in Kansas City. Haven't won a Super Bowl since I didn't know about it when I was 2 years old, not even close. And you really do condition yourself to, honest to God, dude. First of all, going into this game against the Texans, everybody already knows that's paying attention that the Texans are wildly, wildly inconsistent. And to never look at the field and say, that's the way it's going to look in 5 minutes. Bill O'Brien is, the most unprepared, and he's someone that doesn't inspire his team, but he's got just enough talent in the right places, to make things happen, to keep his head above water and keep up appearances with the McNairs, another group of owners that are idiots, right? But as I'm watching this game, I know that going in, right? And so when all this crazy stuff is happening, you have that going on, Matt. And then you have a 50-year-old man who has to sit in the chair, the lucky chair, and not move. And I refuse to allow my emotions to get involved in the game. So I'm now at the point where don't feel sorry for me anymore. I'm good. Everything is cool. And
you ran out of touchdown fireworks, Brooks. It's okay.
Well, but as far as the Chiefs go, just in the context of that game, and I know they did blow them out and their offense did come around, but the offense that we saw once they got rolling, that's the way it should be, because and the Texans defense was god awful. But this offense for the Chiefs, if they're not producing, they should be. But all that being said, right, and because I'm so divorced emotionally for what I just told you, all that being said, I think the Titans have a very good chance to win, and I wouldn't be surprised if they won. And you look at that performance of the offensive line by the Titans and the Chiefs defensive line, who freaking knows? Chiefs defense in general, and Tannehill has been the best quarterback in the NFL since week 7. And it's not just, well, he's riding those stats in the regular season and this is his first playoff. No. Now he's proven it. And I haven't even mentioned Henry. You got A.J. Brown sitting there. They have weapons. Why can't the Titans win this game?
Well, they can, and you're going to have to see Kansas City come out and play from the first minute of that game
right.
Like they played the final 40 or so minutes of the game yesterday, because if they fall behind early, let's say they fall behind 14-0 early, which isn't unheard of with Andy Reid coach teams in conference championship games, because he tends to get conservative, especially late in the game for whatever reason. But if they fall behind, Derrick Henry is going to, shove it down their throats. Derrick Henry is going to be a battering ram for however long it takes to shorten that game. And Mike Vrabel, to me, based on what I saw 2 weeks ago in New England and the manipulation of the clock in the last 5 minutes,
shocking,
shortening that game against Bill Belichick, I really believe he's the next great innovator among head coaches. We all talked about, the next Sean McVay and how you needed to get the next young guy in there. I think the Titans found it in Mike Vrabel. He's a guy who can motivate his team, and he seems to be brilliant. So if the Chiefs can go out and punch them in the mouth early and get Travis Kelce involved early, and the speed of Tyreek Hill on the outside, and Patrick Mahomes does his thing, it could get out of hand. But I think that if this becomes a dogfight, if this becomes a 15-round heavyweight fight where these teams are trading possessions, I don't think that's a game the Chiefs are going to want to get into, because the Titans can shorten the game and beat you with running the football, as they did Baltimore and the Patriots in the past 2 games.
So you're picking the Chiefs.
The Chiefs, yeah.
You're picking the Chiefs, and you're picking
the Packers.
Really?
Those are my picks.
Now you screwed up my week, because I was all set to give up on the Packers, and now I got to think about it. You got
to think about it, because you have Aaron Rodgers, who's probably the best quarterback walking the planet right now. You have Aaron Jones. You have a vicious front seven that's just been assembled this past offseason and playing with a chip on their shoulder, like we saw Zadarius Smith the other night. I just think they have all the ingredients in place. Mike McCarthy's no longer there. And I think that, like we talked about earlier, I think it's a confluence of today's NFL in the passing game against the old school run the football physicality of the 80s and 90s. And I think that the tendencies of the 2020s are going to win out.
Man, this is going to be unbelievable. This has been a great playoff. And I really like playoffs like this. We've had a lot of close. 7 out of 8 games have been close. But we've gotten rid of a lot of the people that, oh, God, the big names, but I just get tired of them. And as much as I like Brady and Breeze and all those guys, I don't like them, because I get sick of just the overdoing it. And but, man, I can't – this has been phenomenal, and I'm glad we were able to stretch it out. I really am, and talk NFL. And we didn't even get to Penn State. That's another 45 minutes in college football. But we've got actually a guy, as I mentioned, you may have heard, my old buddy Gene Sapakoff from the Charleston paper, who covers the Clemson beat, coming up here in a second. But I can't thank you enough, man. We look forward to seeing you again soon. And by the way, hang in there. This is a tough situation with Joe Judge, how that's going down. So keep us posted, man.
You got it, Brooks. Thanks for having me on, and enjoy that game tonight.
Thanks. And I will. And that's Matt Lombardo, NJ.com, Newark Star Ledger, beat reporter for the New York Giants. Think about that job, by the way. That's a big boy job. New York Giants beat writer. Okay. That's like Jay Glazer, right? It's like if you had a locker back in the day, you probably did, in the old school, old school newspaper. I mean, like every job you had a locker. In 1957, you had a locker, and you probably had a locker if you worked the Newark Star Ledger years ago. But Jay Glazer, of course, that's where he really started to make his bones. And that's where Sean Payton was as an assistant coach before he went to and of course, Sean Payton is association with the Cowboys and now with the Saints. But man, I mean, when you think about what it's like, in a practical sense to have a job like that, the people that are in that job don't think this way. They don't think the way I do, which is why they're doing it and I'm not. But it's like, if I'm covering the Titans, well, except for this year, or let's say I'm covering the Jags, right? And I wake up late one day or something happens, you're not ready to, you don't have to worry about losing your job more than likely if you cover the Cardinals. Yeah. And you miss something because your phone died or something. You don't really have to sweat it. You're not sweating bullets when you're trying to get a hold of your boss because you screwed up. Where are you? If it's the Giants, it's like the post office. You can't be late. You're late, you're fired. That's your job, is you can't be late. You have to be a machine. And so it's and one of the reasons why I kind of expressed that little sentimental emotion to him, I don't know if I call it sentimental, but empathetic, is that Joe Judge hire. You cannot emphasize it enough. Came out of nowhere. And there's so many red flags from the Giants, or there's so many tip-offs that indicate that the Giants just got blown off by Matt Rule. And the reason they got blown off was the Mara family went all in on a dunce, Dave Gettleman. computer folks, right? I'm not saying that you can't talk a certain way, express yourself a certain way, but that's not something that isn't an accurate portrayal of his understanding of that side of the business. And when you're talking about, and we're going to be bringing on, by the way, Gene Sapakoff. Hopefully we'll be able to grab him. It's such a busy free. I mean, it's a miracle. When I got in touch with him, I was thinking, oh man, it's game day. Clemson was just getting in touch to say hello. And hey man, you got time? Yeah, no. So hopefully we'll be able to grab him because, spirit him away from, Dabo and the boys that unassuming, scrappy bunch at Clemson that we've all grown to love. And, well, maybe not. Actually, it's LSU this year. And I can't remember, by the way, we're now transitioning to college football. I can't remember a year where there was a team. I'm a Georgia guy. I went to school at the University of Georgia, played football there. And I cannot remember a year when there was a team where I said to myself, when they got to a title game or, championship game, that I was like all in and just was going to drop everything to watch their game and root for them. And this LSU team, probably in my lifetime, I can't remember a team where I was more into. And of course, they're playing Clemson. Nothing against Clemson, but it's who coaching Clemson. Not one of my favorite people for different reasons. And I'm really torn about guys like Dabo Swinney because I know he does a hell of a lot of good for a hell of a lot of people, and to a certain extent. But the underlying bedrock of college football and basketball is so un-American in not compensating players, not providing guaranteed health care, taking the money that the schools make and plowing it into shiny objects like Xboxes in the locker room, miniature golf courses at Clemson. That's Dabo Swinney. Dabo Swinney comes off, and I'm sure he is to a certain extent. I mean, you can't do what he did. I just want you to know I recognize this. Unless you're somebody like Nick Saban, who oversigns more than any coach in the history of college football, and then just cuts guys and then calls them into his office and tells them, I'll find a place for you in another school as long as you don't say I cut you, as long as you keep up appearances and say you're hurt or you want to move on. Great. I'll help you get to UConn or whatever, right? You're all set. As long as you don't tell people that I cut you. That's Nick Saban. And that's why Alabama does what it does. Because when teams play Alabama, their first stringers are just as good. And for some teams, they're second stringers. And in football, you sure as hell better have good second stringers, if not third. And that's what Alabama has across the board, 3 deep. Now, mind you, not this year, not on defense especially. And of course, we know what happened at quarterback, but defense is what killed Alabama in the game against LSU, which was their season, period. Why was it their season? Because Nick Saban decided in previous years that he was going to schedule 4 New Mexico States non-conference. That's why. Games they could have changed at the last second, because they can change them last second. They can bring in better teams. They chose not to. And because they chose not to, and they knew when they made this schedule, or they knew Alabama I'm talking about, because this is why they're not there. They weren't in the playoff this year. Was flat out, Saban decided, we're going to play a joke non-conference schedule, And listen, it was truly a joke. It wasn't one of those things like the way Notre Dame schedules where, you may catch Florida State on a good year, or Miami, or, they have a lot of teams on their schedule that are Louisville. Louisville will go through a stretch where they've got a pretty damn good team, and then all of a sudden it's a disaster. They got a lot of Boston College, right? That's the art to what Notre Dame does schedule-wise. They don't go in and schedule teams that are consistent, or at least they don't try to. And but Alabama took it one step further. I mean, when you're Alabama and you're playing Western Carolina, like the school about 2 miles from your house that's in your neighborhood that doesn't have a football field, and you didn't even know they had a football program, that's Western Carolina. Oh, really? They got a... Are you sure it's not East Carolina? No, it's not East Carolina. No, it's not. It's not North Carolina. It's not North Carolina State. It's not North Carolina A&T. It's Western Carolina playing Alabama. Like, what was it, week 10? Something like that? Right. That was a decision that was made deliberately by Saban. And that's why they weren't in the running for the college. Well, they were, but they weren't. That's why it was different this year. In the past, the playoff committee has had a pretense to spirit Alabama into the playoff unfairly because they played a representative non-conference schedule. And boy, how about Alabama next year? Did they hit a 21. They've got SC. I think it's to open this season. And I'd love to know when that game was scheduled. There's an idea out there, and, it's legitimate that, well, they schedule these games 40 years in advance, and sometimes they do schedule them way out in advance. But like everything in college football, everything, it can not only be changed, but it can be changed at the last minute. Just like the idea that they can't pay players because if you're going to pay these guys, it's going to be this, nightmare to try to figure out. It'll take forever, and you've got title. No, you don't. No, you don't. Oh, no, you don't. How do I know? Because what is this, the 150th anniversary of college football? And for how many years did we not have a playoff? Right? Almost 150 years, nearly. And every year it was the same debate over and over and over again. And one of the main tenets that was espoused as to why we did not have a playoff in college football was that it was too complicated, and think about the arguments that were made against it. And of course, you've got the academic side of it, and we can't have too many games. But how are you going to put it together? It's too difficult, right? I mean, there's going to be people left out. And what about tradition, right? That tradition that includes Texas A&M no longer playing Texas, Kansas no longer playing Missouri, and Cam Smith, our producer, I'm sure will give me some other examples of rivalries that just in the last few years have gone away, right? Tradition, academics, complexity. That's why we don't have a play. Oh, wait, we do. Oh, because, John Skipper of ESPN, the president, just wrote us an enormous check. Thank you very much, John. We'll see you in New Orleans, right? That's how it works. So after 140 some odd years of excuses like that, overnight, we have a playoff. Overnight. And so when you and understand why, I just told you why. ESPN decided to make it worth the schools and the conferences while to play extra games and change the system. But understand, the system means nothing. Let me just tell you this. It's so funny. It's all good. Don't worry about Cam. We can figure everything out in the future. Don't worry about it with whatever the situation is. So, understand that everything that is ever portrayed to you, with college sports, the status quo, and the ultimate example is, and that's what's so un-American. That's the word I have to use, un-American, because it is. I mean, and so I got into this whole discussion because the illegitimacy of the bedrock that college football and basketball rests on, because I was talking about Dabo Swinney, the coach of Clemson, who, by all accounts, you do like, and I'll guarantee you, I'm in the minority of people who are paying attention, when it comes to him. And the vast majority of people, well, they don't pay attention as close as I do, but love the guy. I'm surprised he doesn't do more kind of national endorsements, because he is, the anti-Saban guy. Or is he? Because if you're paying attention, he's not necessarily that different from Saban in some ways. And that's why it's very difficult for me to reconcile appreciating him, liking him, believing what comes out of his mouth, the principles that he espouses. When a guy like Dabo Swinney, who is brilliant, is a genius, what he's done at Clemson, and if we don't talk to Gene today because he's too busy, we'll talk to him tomorrow. God knows this is the one day of the year that he would be busy, but we may not visit with him today. We'll talk to Gene here, maybe after the game tomorrow. But when it comes to what he's done at Clemson, I mean, the reason I know Gene Sapakoff is, I worked in the state of South Carolina. I did a statewide talk show, weekday talk show, where I had to learn the pronunciations of all the towns in South Carolina. And I covered University of South Carolina Gamecock football and did the coaches shows. I was on the football and basketball broadcast. So I did all of that in South Carolina. I lived in Charleston for a couple of years as well, and have spent a lot of time there. And so trust me when I tell you, and I went to Georgia, what he's done at Clemson, you have to be a genius to pull that off. You have to be brilliant, and you have to have some substance to what you're doing in terms of authenticity in how you treat your players and the people of your program. And boy, I hate to use the word culture. Just shoot me, please. But there's no doubting that, at least in the case of Clemson, there is one, and it's born out of, more than anything, consistency, in my opinion. And I know a coach on the Clemson staff right now. I've known him for many, many years. And I can tell you that Swinney is very consistent, and he leads by example. He's not one of these do as I say, not as I do guy. That can work if you have overwhelming talent and you're gaming the system, like Nick Saban, who's a really bad guy. Really bad guy. And Clemson right now has that. But Swinney he's cut from a different cloth. And the other thing about Clemson that you might see a glimpse of here and there, and I know you've seen this if you're following them, is religion, being a Christian is at the forefront of, the program, the approach, the collective interaction that goes on with the team. And where are they? They're in Clemson, South Carolina, which is basically Anderson, Greenville, South Carolina. Do you know where that is? Do you know how to get there? Do you know what airport to fly into? Right? Good luck. So it is, though. I mean, I just think, and I know I'm getting deep and philosophical into this, but this is really I love college football so much, and I can't wait to watch this game. And this is why, boy, I can't wait to watch the game, because I'm going to be rooting for LSU like you wouldn't believe. I mean, just to focus on them and the positive. And I'm not saying Clemson's not positive, but one thing before I mention LSU, that, and we'll talk to Gene about it when we talk to him about it, but I feel like I'm the only person on earth thinking this, but everybody is putting Trevor Lawrence in the same category as Joe Burrow, right? And they're citing Lawrence's gaudy statistics, right? Since the North Carolina game, I guess. And they're comparing those to Joe Burrow. The same people who will tell you that Clemson hasn't played anybody this year, right? Except for their most recent game, when Trevor Lawrence's passing wasn't really a factor. It was his running. It was his extraordinary running. Like, say, I'm not saying he's a similar guy in terms of running the football effectiveness, but like a Lamar Jackson. You know, that was Trevor Lawrence. That's how they won that game, was his running the football, not passing, not reading defenses, not going through his progressions. It's Trevor Lawrence running, and he deserves credit for it. But he's not a running quarterback, and he'll never be a running quarterback, even though he's very athletic. And so when you apply that to his NFL future, and you talk about him in the context of that comparison with Burrow, right now at least, there is no comparison. Burrow has put up arguably the greatest passing season in college football history for a quarterback. And one of the reasons it's arguably the greatest of all time is the level of competition. And Trevor Lawrence doesn't have any competition to go up against. So when he was facing Wake Forest and NC State, he was great passing the football, right? When he faced Ohio State, he wasn't, but he ran the football very well. And the reason why I say, Jesus, it feels like I'm the only person who recognizes this, right? But, and I know there's a hype machine, I get it, but not just that. But I don't see people pointing out, hey, wait a minute. What kind of game did Lawrence have against Ohio State? It was a running game. And Ohio State panicked. Ryan Day panicked. It was obvious when they got those bad calls, they freaked out. They had a first-year coach who hadn't been through the situation before, and Dabo Swinney stayed the course. Well, we'll also talk to Gene Sapakoff, who joins us now, and old friend of mine, longtime Charleston Rainbows beat reporter. Actually, you're a columnist, or you're like a baseball writer. You were never covering the team like the Rainbows, were you, Gene? Gene, were you ever like the River Dogs or you were a columnist, right? You were a highfalutin guy.
Yeah, highfalutin guy. You know, not like one of these beat guys, Brooks. You know, although I'm old enough to have done my time doing that too.
Right, absolutely. And so we're visiting with we're privileged to have Gene Sapakoff of the Charleston Post Courier. And Gene, I've been doing this show for about 5 months, and I've had experiences like this. It's really been a revelation and a lot of fun to get a chance to reconnect with people like this and actually talk to you face to face. We're not just typing out a message, but it's great to see it. I can't thank, dude, on a day like this, and you haven't heard from me, you are the man. I really appreciate it.
Very cool, Brooks. I am honored to be on your show. I mean, I've been watching and seen so many good things about it and followed you for a long time, obviously.
So, and I was just talking about Clemson, and I want to ask you, first of all, about the Ohio State game, because my uninformed opinion, I wasn't there. I'm a dummy in Los Angeles throwing things against the wall. my impression was first-year coach Ryan Day, once they got that significant adversity, especially the fumble penalty or the fumble call that went against Ohio State, my sense was that Ohio State really kind of panicked, and Ryan Day may have been a part of that, and Clemson just kind of stayed the course. What was your read on that game?
Yeah, I think Ohio State overall, Brooks outplayed Clemson. I mean, they outgained them by 99 yards. Even in Clemson's 2 playoff losses to Alabama, they weren't outgained by that much. I think you nailed it. The veteran coaching staff that has been now 8 college football playoff games just got the best of a first-year coach and a lot of his guys that, while they were maybe on some of Urban Meyer's staffs and so forth in the playoffs, I mean, they were new in their positions, and that was critical down the stretch.
And I would be remiss. I don't want to blame Ryan Day, and I don't want to blame him at all, because that may not be right. But also Justin Fields, even though that guy is, wow, he looks like a great quarterback. And as a Georgia fan, it makes me want to jump out the window watching him as Jake Fromm has the year he had, and now he's gone. So that's not necessarily a bad thing, but he's still a first-year guy and made some bizarre plays there at the end. But now when you look at Trevor Lawrence, and I was just going on and on about this on my show, I feel like, Gene, I'm the only person on earth, when people compare Joe Burrow, right, which they do, to Trevor Lawrence, and Trevor Lawrence is automatically the first pick, after next year, I say to myself, okay, after the North Carolina game, you got Clemson didn't play anybody. That's when he built up those great statistics. And then when you guys, Clemson beat Ohio State, it was because of his running, not necessarily because of his passing. So are people, is it fair to compare him to Joe Burrow and to lock him in as a first overall pick? Am I a dummy? Am I missing something? Or am I just wrong? Or what's your assessment of Lawrence?
Trevor Lawrence is terrific. I mean, I think I'm old enough to have covered in his final year as a college football player, John Elway. And I think still that he's the best, most talented college quarterback that I've seen. I think Trevor Lawrence compares favorably. He can throw that 15-yard out while rolling right and throwing left like no one else I've ever seen. Dabo Swinney emphasized with Lawrence in the offseason, hey, you need to extend plays. You need to use your legs more to gain yards when things aren't working well. And wow, did you see that against Ohio State? And one more thing about Trevor Lawrence, Brooks, he threw 14 touchdown passes and 8 interceptions over Clemson's first 7 games this year, 22 touchdown passes, 0 interceptions over the last 7.
So because my whole conspiracy theory is that the passing is not necessarily as good as people make it out to be. You're good with the passing, and you think it rises to the level of a Joe Burrow or a first overall, his passing.
I do. I think he clearly has benefited from some really good, really tall receivers, and he'll throw those 50-50 balls up there, and those guys will go get them. They're not necessarily perfect throws, so he benefits from that. If he gets picked in the NFL by the worst team, in the NFL next season, he's not necessarily going to have that edge at wide receiver for a while. But yeah, just as far as, there's no question he's got a better arm than Joe Burrow. As far as,
but so is Josh Allen.
Yeah, that's a good point, and he can run a little bit, and that's what I was about to get to. It's above the shoulders. Joe Burrow is a stunningly impressive leader guy, and I think that's why he'll be good in the NFL. I think Trevor Lawrence is that good, but we'll just have to see.
It sounds like you like Clemson in this game. Do you like Clemson against LSU?
I tell you what, I like just about everybody else, a close, high-scoring game. I cannot go against the team that's won 29 straight and against defensive coordinator Brent Venables, but I wouldn't be stunned either way. And Brooks, I'll tell you something. Clemson beat Alabama 44-16 last year. That really wasn't a 44-16 game. What happened is, Nick Saban and company get a little behind, and then they've got to try some things at the end. So you have a fake field goal that doesn't work. One team or the other could win by 20 tonight because the other team is pressing at the end. But yeah, I like Clemson close in a high scoring game.
And one thing that really speaks to, I think, Saban's success and Dabo's success is it obviously is not predicated on in-game. To me, it isn't on in-game coaching by assistant coaches. Those assistant coaches, their primary contribution to the program is as recruiters. And of course, the coach is totally committed to recruiting. I think that's what sets Clemson and Alabama apart. I don't want to sell any assistant coaches short, but I wanted to ask you specifically, and I never hear people talking about this, especially about Clemson. That's to their credit, I guess. But Tony Elliott, now you've got him there as your offensive coordinator, and Jeff Scott's gone. I mean, what do you think? I mean, how strong is Clemson there? Is that a weakness? Is that reflective of maybe some of the problems that they had against Ohio State? Is that something that we should be aware of? Could that be a factor in the game?
No, I think Clemson's coaching staff is solid, especially at the top. Jeff Scott and Tony Elliott, this is their last ride together tonight as co-coordinators. And, like you said, Scott's going to South Florida. But I think those are really good coaches that have proven it. Tony Elliott as a play caller against Bob Stoop twice, against Nick Saban twice. He's got 2 playoff wins against Saban and company. And even in the losses, 45-40 when Clemson lost their first national championship game under Sweeney, they're going against Kirby Smart as a defensive coordinator, with Alabama. And so I think the Clemson coaches are really good. And hey, Brooks, like you pointed out, man, it's all about recruiting. And as Sweeney pointed out just yesterday, Clemson never in his 11 years has been number one, consensus wise in a recruiting class, except for just this year.
Wow.
So the rich get richer.
So they added another waterfall to the miniature golf course. That sounds, congratulations for that one. So, yeah, man, I know how big, I want to have you definitely back so we can kind of stretch it out, but man, I know it's a tough day, but I do want to ask you one more question. And this is for people here, and we've got a lot of people that are SC people, and they are on fire about the football program. And I talked about Tony Elliott. I was one of the few to talk about Tony Elliott as a candidate potentially for big jobs and for the USC job. And in my opinion, he absolutely would be a great hire for the USC head coaching job. I know people at Clemson don't want to hear that, but why the heck is he not out there right now as a leading candidate for the very best jobs in the country?
I'll tell you why, because the Clemson top assistants now are in a spot where they're either going to take a group of 5 job where they can get to a New Year's Day 6 game, and that was Jeff Scott to South Florida, or they're going to take a major college Power 5 job that is a place where they can win. So it's not going to be Mississippi State or Wake Forest. It's going to be
or Florida State. Why not? Why Florida? Go ahead.
I'm surprised. Yeah, no, I think Tony Elliott would work at Southern Cal, Florida State. I think he'd work at Texas. This guy is really good and really thorough recruiter, program builder, teacher, and I think he'd be good with fans. He's really smart too. He's got an engineering degree and worked in private business for a while, so he's got it all. I'm a huge Tony Elliott fan. I think he's actually the guy on the staff that would make the best head coach.
So one last time, this sounds stupid, but to USC fans, if a USC fan was asking you, hey, Gene, is Tony Elliott a guy that would be great at USC or good, a good fit at USC? Could he do the job? And would he, in your opinion, be successful at SC? What's your assessment at USC?
I'm old enough, Brooks, to have covered USC football back when John Robinson and Ted Tollner were coaching. Yeah. I think he would be successful, but you have to give him time because he's going to build things, the right way and slowly and carefully. So it's got to be a 4-year deal that you let him progress a little bit each year. But if he's there in his 4th year, they'll be really good.
Man, I got to get down to Charleston. Jesus, it's been a long time.
You do. They miss you, Brooks. I'm not going to tell any stories, but yeah, they miss Gary, you. It's still a legend.
Yeah. And as I mentioned earlier on the show, how about me going through that gauntlet at College Park, which nobody remembers by now, right? And you guys go and build what is now an old ballpark, I guess, in Charleston, and you get that new ballpark with Joe Riley and all that stuff right when I leave. So I got to go back and at least experience that. And I don't want to think about it, man. So.
Absolutely. And the places they really miss you are not at the ballpark. It's some other place.
I knew you were going to get the needle out, man. I knew you were going to do something, man. The columnist who just, prances into the press box once a week, and we're slogging away.
Yeah.
But thanks again, man. Have a great game. We'll see you on Twitter, and we're going to have you back soon and talk more about Clemson, college football, and everything else, man.
Thanks for having me on, Brooks.
That's Gene Sapakoff of the Charleston Post and Courier, and he is as good as it gets when it comes to covering a beat. Trust me, having worked next to him in Charleston for years, and that's not an easy gig. I can imagine dealing with that program, and then also he's in what's called the Low Country, and Clemson is in the Upstate. Handy, how convenient. So you got to make the trip up. I think it's like I-25 or something. Why don't we, while we have time, let's just do one last thing and then we'll wrap, Cam. One last thing, and I hate these things normally, and it doesn't mean I really like this one that much, but because I want LSU to win so much tonight, and it is cool, I want to sent out a tribute to LSU as they play tonight against Clemson. And this is their latest hype video, and it is narrated by The Rock. And this is out on Twitter and all around the world. You've probably seen snippets of it. But this is the LSU hype video. That's a thing, right? And for this game, and it's The Rock, Dwayne Johnson narrating it. So let's run that clip, and then we'll wind things up. And let me see it. There we go. Some serious audio right there.
The closer I get to the top, the more I think about rock bottom. The closer I get to the finish line, the more I think about where I started. I remember the past, and it anchors me to the present. I remember dark days and hungry nights. I remember being told I wasn't good enough and wondering if it was true. I remember having nothing, giving everything, and yet still falling short. Rock bottom transformed me. It fortified me. It made me who I am. Made me promise myself to never go back and to never forget. I remember every doubt. That's why I believe. I remember every failure. That's why I succeed. I remember every defeat. That's why I win. I remember rock bottom. That's why I know where I'm going. So let's go.
Have that LMB. I hope you have. I hope you don't have cheap speakers, because we may have blown them out. Oh, and we get heartbeat. I don't know about you, Cam, but that reminds me, the narration, the words remind me of the Rudyard Kipling poem, If. Do you know that poem? The Rudyard, the poem, I'm not going to read the whole thing. If you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust yourself when all men doubt you, but make allowances for their doubting too. If you can wait and not be tired by waiting or being lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating. And yet don't look too good nor talk too wise. And the ending of this poem is great. Not a big fan of the guy and the meaning behind, the reason that what he meant it to mean, the paternalism of colonialism. Kipling, that's really what was behind this poem. But the last little stanza, this is the end of it. If you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and everything that's in it. And which is more, you'll be a man, my son. That kind of reminded me a little bit of the words for the hype video. What's striking to me in that video is there's like no highlights. You notice there wasn't anything that they had done necessarily on the field. I guess that would just be accomplishments, and they wouldn't be able to counterbalance it with, well, I guess they could if they put negative things that had happened on the field. But man, that's what I want to see. That's, to me, what really gets me fired up. But of course, they're, even though they're aiming at LSU fans, true believers, and but also the players, and trying to motivate them, and close ranks at the same time and connect with the players directly. So, yeah, we get the heartbeat sound effect. Of course, you're going to get that, right? Or you could get the ticking of a clock. The hour has struck, right? So, tomorrow we'll be back and we'll be talking about this game, and I'll be continuing to filibuster guests with my pet theories that are completely uninformed, robbing you of valuable insight from them. Now, we've got some great guests coming up. I know we have Ken Carman already tomorrow. We haven't had him in a while, and he is like almost kind of a Pat McAfee sort of guy for Cleveland, kind of the mayor of Cleveland morning show guy. But and we've got John Walters as well, from The Athletic. But by the way, I think we may have some fireworks from Ken Carman, because Ken Carman is the kind of guy, not shy. But when I say he's not shy, and this is a mainstream big guy, he's on the Browns broadcast, he like lost his mind and went on this crazy rant that ended up viral during the season, not in a bad way, but with the Browns. And I don't know. I don't want to push him too far with what's going on there, but it's kind of hard not to. So I'm very interested. I've got we've never really seen that side of Ken on this show, and he's a great guy. But if you're ever going to see it, having a baseball guy who doesn't live in Cleveland, Paul DePodesta, run the organization with Mr. Flying J, Jimmy Haslam. And I mean, I really think that it's gotten worse, not better. They would have been better off keeping Kitchens and Dorsey rather than bring in Stefanski, who I don't think is an improvement on anything. I don't know. We'll talk to Ken about it tomorrow. So we'll have some pro football. We'll have some college football. We'll have some football, as we do every weekday, starting at noon Eastern time here on Sports by Brooks on Fancred. Great job today, as always, by our producer, Cam Smith. And I really want to thank our guests. We had a great stretched out conversation with Matt Lombardo, and you can hear just how much that guy knows. A lot more than me, that's for sure. So we want to thank him. And then, of course, Gene Sapakoff, we just had him. And we shall see you tomorrow. So from Los Angeles, for our producer, Cam Smith, I'm Brooks Melchior saying so long. This has been Sports by Brooks on Fancred.